We'll move on to our second speaker for this session, Professor Peter Elias, who's Professor of Employment Research at the University of Warwick, but also ESRC Strategic Advisor on Data Resources.
Okay, thank you very much. I should admit to the fact that I've been working as a researcher for 36 years at the University of Warwick, and only for the last 12 years or so helping the ESRC in terms of the strategic development of data and related resources. And within the period at Warwick, a lot of that time has been spent on research which is associated with the evaluation of programs and service delivery. So I'm going to try and do two things today, perhaps neither of those I'll do very effectively. I'm going to try and draw out some general points and lessons from all of the work that we've been doing on evaluation methodologies and so on. You'll be hearing a lot more detail from others you've heard already, and you'll be hearing later on today from others much more detail about the kind of work that they've been doing. And I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm going to try and discuss the broad sort of typologies, and then I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and finally draw out what I call some guiding principles which you can take issue with if you so wish. So that's the structure of the presentation that I'm going to make. I'm hoping then to reserve a little bit of time at the end to talk about, well, how can the ESRC help those who want to get involved in or are undertaking various types of evaluation? What kinds of resources, programs, initiatives are available now and are coming up in the near future that are going to be helpful? So, first of all, trying to answer that question, what is evaluation of public service delivery? Well, it's the lack of any market mechanism. It's the lack of a price system. We don't have any need to evaluate whether Apple computers are better than Microsoft computers. We just let the market choose. And price mechanisms. And we're very careful to ensure that market mechanisms work and work effectively. But when it comes to public service, and we're talking here about public goods, there is no market. We might sometimes pretend there's a market, we might call it a market, but it's not what we would call an effective market from an economic perspective. Then we have to become involved in evaluation methods, because the market isn't going to give us the signals that we want. But there's lots of different types of evaluation. There's something we call implementation evaluation. If we try to do something, does the process of implementing it work? There's cost-benefit analysis, some very well-known form of evaluation, where you try to measure up the benefits and put some financial measure onto those, and you compare that with what you know about the costs of a program. But measuring those benefits and putting a financial tag on them is often very difficult indeed, and does rely itself upon other types of evaluation for you to be able to do that. Impact evaluation is the kind of broad term that we give towards the notion, does this program or initiative or service do what it's supposed to do? We had an aim and objective when we set up this program. Are we achieving that aim and objective? And within that, of course, we'll be looking at interdependencies, looking at side effects and so on, and trying to get a holistic picture of the evaluation. There's also something we call technical evaluation. That's more to do with the technical aspects of whether a program service is functioning appropriately. And finally, and you've had plenty of people have mentioned this already today, local context evaluation. If we're engaged in national evaluation of a service or service delivery or a program, is it implemented? Does it work? Is it operating in a way which is even across the country, or does it have context-specific factors associated with it? So local context evaluation is very important. The methods that we employ. We draw from our theories within economics, sociology. We use statistics, statistical techniques, management sciences. and you've heard quite a bit on this already today, plus sometimes law, psychology, geography. All of these disciplines come together, and that's what makes evaluation so exciting, but it also sometimes makes it very difficult. You find people come from different theoretical perspectives and have different ideas about how to measure and how, in terms of what's important in the evaluation process. Not surprisingly then, we often see that mixed methods are used, this mix of quantitative and qualitative techniques. So it's not only often multidisciplinary, it's also multi-method in terms of the types of information that's being processed. The quantitative evaluation requires significant amounts of data. And the reason I say this is that whenever we do something, whenever we intervene, whenever we provide a public service, and then we try to change it in some way, which is often what we're doing, or we have a program where we're trying to, say, intervene in a labour market or trying to reduce unemployment by having a new program for unemployed people or whatever, the effects are generally small. We know this from the work that we've done reviewing studies all over the world, that we often get quite small effects. And it's not surprising when you think about it. I mean, think about the situation of becoming educated at a higher level, getting a degree. We know that that makes a significant difference to your earning prospects and to the type of job you do and to your general life satisfaction. But it can cost £20,000 to £50,000 for an individual to achieve that. And it's often the case that when we have interventions, other types of intervention, we're talking about spending a few £1,000s per individual. So it's not at all surprising that the effects we are trying to measure are small, and that means we often need large amounts of data to be able to be precise about the nature of these effects. It's been said also, Lindsay made the comment earlier on, about having longitudinal measurements, how important it is to measure change. So longitudinal measurements at the micro level, at the level of the unit, that is the person or the household or the organisation. It's important to be able to monitor changes through time. Geographical information is very important. Have we got the right kinds of information at a geographical level? And of course we need to employ quite advanced statistical techniques to deal with lots of problems, the predominant one being called selection bias. That is, that whatever program we introduce, there are all sorts of ways in which people select themselves onto programs or are selected through particular rules that apply for their eligibility for programs. And if we don't take account of these and try to model them, then we have problems. Oh, hang on, sorry, here we are. So the kind of problems that we face, we often refer to the randomised controlled trial, RCT, as the gold standard approach. And in fact, there have been some evaluations which have been able to adopt this approach. They are notoriously difficult to establish. It's very difficult to get the control that you want. It's very difficult to randomise. It's often deemed unethical to randomise access to a particular programme or service delivery. When it can be done, it's quite interesting, but we spend a lot of time then picking holes in what we see as flaws in the control mechanisms. But it's a very useful think piece. It's a very useful way of thinking about evaluation. If you could do a randomised controlled trial, what would it look like? If you were God, if you had complete control over the world and you could design the very best randomised controlled trial, what would it look like? And then step back from that and say, well, what are we actually doing? How does it differ? And what factors are then going to creep in that we need to take account of in our evaluation? Measurement and reporting errors, of course, are always very significant, as they are in the whole of the social and economic sciences, but they are particularly difficult when it comes to programs, because you're often asking people about their participation in a program. And you get what's often called halo effects. People tend to look back and say, well, I did that, and so it was worth doing, because otherwise they have to admit that they've been wasting their time. Sometimes they will tell you that it was a waste of time, but quite often you've got to deal with what's called the halo effect. The kinds of data that we need, well, in one word, all kinds of data. And it can be administrative data, it could be what I call tracking data, survey data, or interview data. And all of these types of data need to be examined for their potential to inform the evaluation process. I'm going to give you two examples of different types of evaluations. The first one is an evaluation of job seekers' allowance. We talk now about job seekers as if it's just a byword. It's very common, but of course in 1996 it was a new word. It was a new word to replace the word unemployment. You weren't unemployed, you were a job seeker. And to be a job seeker, therefore, you had to be looking for work. But the main change that came about with the introduction of job seekers' allowance was a reduction in eligibility for the statutory part of the payment from 12 months to 6 months. And there were lots of questions about the impact that would have. But one question was, how would it affect the behaviour of other household members? And I'll explain that in a moment. The second example I'm going to give you, Sure Start, the national evaluation of Sure Start. And this is the programme set up throughout England, which was modelled on the US Head Start programme. And it's a very general programme. It's got lots of ways in which agencies interact with families with young children to help them to overcome what was seen as the cycle of disadvantage. And again, that has got elements of implementation, evaluation, and impact evaluation. Job seekers' allowance. This was of interest because of the fact that in households where a man was unemployed, the partner of the man, female partner of the man, was generally 30 to 40% less likely to be in employment. And we knew this from aggregate household statistics. And there were many theories around at the time as to why that was. One of them being that men who are more likely to become unemployed, they tend to partner women who are less likely to work. Another one being that in areas of high unemployment, of course the men are more likely to be unemployed because it's an area of high unemployment, and if it's an area of high unemployment, it's an area of low employment, therefore their wives, female partners, are less likely to find work. And finally, and this was the interesting one, from an evaluation perspective, that it's all about the rules regarding receipt of benefit. Once you pass the statutory entitlement, which many people do, once they've gone on to long-term unemployment, post 12 months, pre-JSA, then their partner's, their wife's employment is reduced on a pound, their benefit is reduced on a pound-for-pound basis in terms of what she earns. In other words, 100% tax on the household income. So what's the point of her working? And we were asked, does the switch to JSA mean that household labour force participation is going to decline? So we used a before and after study design, micro level, 2 longitudinal studies, one carried out before the introduction of the new benefit and one carried out, an identical study carried out after the evaluation, after the implementation of JSA. We asked people to recall and give a detailed account week by week of their work and employment and unemployment histories over what was effectively a 2.5-year period. And we conducted detailed multivariate analysis of the movements into and out of employment. And I'm not going to give you the multivariate stuff, but we did do some visualization with this, and this was quite interesting. If you can see the dotted line there, this is the male respondent in these surveys, and these surveys were of people who had reported that they'd been claiming unemployment. So it's a sample from the unemployment register. And so, of course, through time, you see the proportion unemployed rising to a peak, the peak being at around about the time that the sample was drawn, and then dropping away again afterwards. But what we're interested in is the line which is just below the horizontal line, and that's the employment of the female partner of the unemployed male. And we can see that it does actually respond to the increase in unemployment. So there is something going on about this not being to do with the spatial distribution of employment opportunity, and it's not so much to do with the homogamous relationship, the way in which partner selection means that you're likely to be marrying or partner with somebody who's less likely to be employed for those people who are experiencing unemployment, but it is a relationship with the benefit system. And so when the benefit system's changed, how does that change? And the answer is in exactly the reverse way that we expected. And I think that was a very interesting finding, and it kind of led us to believe that the reduction in the period of entitlement does not have a depressing overall effect on household labour force participation. Very quickly, national evaluation of Sure Start. And what's really interesting about this study, I'm not going through the details on here, what's very interesting about this study is the way it piggybacked on an existing longitudinal study. We had just commissioned the Millennium Cohort, a study of about 20,000 babies born in the years 2000-2001. And the Sure Start people wanted to evaluate this new program that had started at round about the same time. And so they chose a sample of families with babies of that age who were born in these Sure Start local program areas, SSLPs as they were called. And of course the Millennium Cohort was then, the sample was redesigned so it oversampled babies in disadvantaged areas. And that gave you a big enough control group, so to speak, sample, a longitudinal sample, that's going to be traced throughout its lifetime for comparison with the children who experienced the Sure Start program. Now, we're only 8 years into the evaluation. It's going to go on for another 10 or 15 years, this evaluation, so it's hugely important. And I think the point I want to draw is that those responsible for the evaluation saw the opportunity to jump on board an existing longitudinal study, or to use the fact that that was happening to tailor the design of their evaluation program. So, very quickly, some guiding principles. As I said before, always consider the counterfactual. This is really like, assessing the very best randomized control trial. Try to think what would be happening in the absence of the public service delivery, the program implementation. The third bullet point on there, always look at what administrative or tracking data are available before you think about collecting new data. There's a lot of data out there, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Think about the best time period and place, obviously, for evaluation. Think particularly about selection effects that will have to be considered. The evidence that already exists, usually the case that somebody's done an evaluation of something similar to what you're looking at. You should draw upon existing evidence wherever possible. Think about the kinds of data that need to be created, if data need to be created. The local contextual effects, how will those be measured and monitored? And finally, what's the most efficient mix of methods and data to inform the evaluation? Now, that's a lot of very awkward, difficult questions to be addressed, but they've all got to be addressed for effective evaluation. So what can the ESRC do about this? My last slide. Many of you know about and perhaps use the services of the UK Data Archive, the Economic and Social Data Service. And that's where you can download copies of labour force surveys and other surveys and so on. And it's also where people may have deposited data sets where they've conducted previous evaluation. And that's kind of interesting to look to see whether there's a micro data set or micro data sets in the data archive that examine something that's similar to the kind of evaluation that you want to undertake. The data archive and the Economic and Social Data Service is changing, and is changing radically from next year, when it will become the UK Data Service. And it will integrate the census data dissemination units. It will have what's called value-added services. Obviously there'll be the secure data service, which currently exists, which is a facility for engaging in the handling and manipulation of data which are disclosive or potentially disclosive. And it will have many other services tagged onto it, particularly, we hope, a geospatial data service. I should also mention Understanding Society, and you probably know this was started now 3 years ago. Wave 3 is in the field. It's now fully funded up to Wave 5 and beyond, and it's going to continue at least for 20 years. It's the world's largest household panel study. You might look at that and say, well, it doesn't have the kind of information that I'm interested in. Well, if it doesn't, talk to the team at Essex about what you want to find out, and they'll tell you about whether there are plans in the future to include that kind of information, or they'll tell you about what's called the affiliated study service that they've set up, whereby if you want to, you can make application to use part of the Understanding Society sample for other research purposes. And it's a convoluted process to go through, but it's well worth considering. I've mentioned the census dissemination units. They're changing. Of course, the census itself and the way the census data is going to be delivered for 2011 is going to be very different from the way census data were delivered for 2001. It will happen sooner, and it will happen in a more comprehensive manner and in a way which is more flexible than was the case with 2001 census. And of course, ESRC is working very closely with Office for National Statistics and GRO Scotland on beyond 2011, what's going to happen for the next census. And that will, I think, be a combination of administrative type data resources, perhaps with some rather larger expanded household survey to go with it. It's not been decided yet, and that's just my view, but 2014 is the critical year when the decision will be made to go with a traditional census or not. The signs are that it will not be a traditional census. Two final points I want to mention. The first is the Secondary Data Analysis Initiative. £10.8 million voted by the ESRC, the Council of the ESRC, to support a secondary data analysis initiative. And if you read the pre-call for proposals that's on the website at the moment, you'll see that there's mention of public service delivery as one of the aims of this initiative. I would add to that innovation in methods, innovation in data linkage, innovation in the approach that one takes to studying problems. And I think it's those proposals that come through which have got this kind of innovative strand within it, which are certainly going to find more favour with the ESRC than the more traditional secondary data analysis approaches. And last but not least, the Administrative Data Task Force. This is something we've been working towards for a long time. We've set up what's called the Administrative Data Liaison Service, which is based up here in Scotland, which provides a very effective service telling you about administrative data sources, but it doesn't provide the access. And this task force is all about improving the access, improving the sharing, improving the ability of researchers to make better use of the huge amounts of administrative data which are currently not exactly locked away, but are under quite often what is such tight guardianship that it creates an effective barrier for their use as research resources. This task force, headed by Sir Alan Langlands, is just about to start its work, and it will report to ministers within 12 months with a set of proposals about how to move forward to open up our administrative data for research purposes. Thank you very much.